Hello, and welcome to Ask a Historian, brought to you by Heritage Mississauga. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, your host and historian with Heritage Mississauga. Together, we'll dive into the fascinating stories that have shaped our city. Remember, you can send your questions to history@heritagemississauga.org and help us explore more local history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us and stay connected with Heritage Mississauga's programs and events. On today's episode of Ask a Historian, we will be sharing some interesting stories from our past, including the origins of streets named Porcupine and Owenwood, and another named after James Austin. Our third story connects to a giant airship that flew over the Credit River Valley in historic Mississauga back in 1930. Our first question this week comes from Maddie, and she is asking, why is there a street called Porcupine? Did we ever have porcupines here? Well, I'm not sure about the porcupine answer in terms of the wild animal, but in terms of the street, it has an interesting story that connects particularly to one family and their experiences. And the name inspiration does not come from this area. It comes from a little bit further up north, but let's jump into that as well. So the name for Porcupine Avenue and also the adjacent Owenwood Drive down in kind of southwest Mississauga connect to both names connect to the story of Mabel and Henry Pettigrew. Owenwood Drive and Porcupine Avenue both run south off of Lakeshore Road. They are located on part of what was historically Lot 25, Concession 3 of south of Dundas Street. This property was originally consisted of 128 acres and was first granted by the Crown to Edgar Neave in 1835, and he subsequently sold it to Daniel Marigold. In 1851, it was purchased by Duncan Oliphant, and in 1868, the property was divided, with 75 acres being granted to Caroline Matthews. From Matthews, the property passed to others, including Jabez Spencer and Joseph Pickett, and then Henry Pickett and William Helmer and Leo Helmer. In 1937, Leo Helmer sold this 75-acre property to Mabel and Henry Owens. Henry Edward Pettigrew, known to those who are close to him as Harry, was born in 1888 and passed away in 1947. And he was born in Birkenhead, Cheshire, England. He arrived in Canada in 1906 and found employment in Haileybury, Ontario, as a miner and a prospector. In 1911, he married Mabel Alice Adshead, and she lived between 1894 and 1980, and they were married in Toronto. Mabel had been born in Toronto, but was living with her family in Haileybury near Lake Temiskaming, likely meaning that Mabel and Harry met while in Haileybury. Harry and Mabel had 5 children together: Gordon, Cecil, Lita, Edgarline, and Lloyd. The family first resided in Haileybury and later moved to South Porcupine near Timmins. In available records, Henry was listed as a miner, prospector, and mining engineer by profession. It is possible that he made his way into northern Ontario during the Cobalt Silver Rush in 1903, the Larder Lake Gold Rush in 1906, and the Porcupine Lake Gold Rush in 1911. There are references that connect the family to Porcupine Lake and to the community of South Porcupine. Hence, I think you're finding the link to the Porcupine Avenue here in Mississauga. But for mineral mining for silver and gold brought boom years to several areas in northern Ontario, and people flocked north and towns rapidly developed. But it was relatively short-lived, and by the early 1930s, many of the mines had closed, and the limited resources had been extracted. In 1937, Harry and Mabel Owens purchased a property here in historic Mississauga near Lorne Park along Lakeshore Road. Harry was referenced at that point as a retired mining engineer. The property they purchased was 75 acres in size and had 2 stately rows of evergreen trees flanking a laneway that led to their house. In 1946, Harry and Mabel subdivided part of their property in what was known as Plan 332, and they laid out Porcupine Avenue, most likely named in reference to the Lake Porcupine Gold Rush and their former home in South Porcupine. Harry died unexpectedly in 1947 at the age of 59 from a heart issue. Mabel sold part of her remaining property to Hugo and Elmer Eichenberger in 1948, who in turn subdivided and laid out Echo Drive, Parkland Drive, and Contour Drive. Mabel Owens retained a small portion of the property, And in 1952, she registered a subdivision plan for number 450 on the remaining property when this established Owenwood Drive, obviously named after Harry and Mabel Owens. In 1953, she sold property to the South Peel Board of Education, who then registered Plan 496 and created Owenwood Public School. The school opened in 1953. So back to the original inquiry. Owenwood Drive and Porcupine Avenue were named for and by Mabel and Henry Owens, who purchased the property in 1937, gradually subdivided their property into building lots, and also laid out two streets over time. Again, Porcupine Avenue and Owenwood Drive. Mabel and Henry Owens are buried nearby at Spring Creek Cemetery on Clarkson Road, and many of the massive evergreen trees that overlook their original laneway are still there today along Owenwood Drive. So our second inquiry today comes from Rebecca. Her question is, who was James Austin? I mistakenly thought we had a road originally named for Jane Austen. Well, thank you, Rebecca. No, it's not Jane Austen, although that'd be kind of a fun twist, wouldn't it, if we explore those kinds of stories. But there is a James Austin Drive located near the kind of the southeast area of Eglinton Avenue and Hurontario Street. And that historically, that part of the Hurontario and Eglinton was the site of the Austin Farm. But we'll jump into this momentarily in terms of looking back of who James Austin was. And there was kind of two of them because James Austin had a son named James as well. But so James Austin Drive is located on what was parts of lots 14 and 15, concession 2, north of Dundas Street. James Austin, who lived between 1806 and 1876, purchased the property on December 21st of 1829. James was the son of John Austin, a loyalist who had received a loyalist land grant in the Ancaster area. James' grandfather, John Austin Sr., was killed in 1781 while serving with the British forces during the American Revolution. The Austin family had immigrated to Canada from North Carolina, originally settling in the Niagara area in 1794. The James Austin of our story married Eleanor Akins in 1834. Eleanor lived between 1816 and 1854. So she was 10 years younger than her husband, James. Eleanor came from a prominent local family. Her brother, James Cox Akins, and his son, Sir James Albert Manning Akins, were both politicians and both served as lieutenant governors of Manitoba. The Akins family also produced notable early doctors, including Dr. Moses Henry Akins and Dr. William Akins. So a very prominent local family, both in politics and in medicine. James and Eleanor Austin had 4 children. James Augustus, and there's the father James has a son James, so James Augustus, Anne Jane, Caroline Elizabeth, and Ellen Amelia. There would have been an early house on the property, but the family added a new brick house, likely in 1865 or 1866. This house remained a fixture on the landscape until 1990. In 1866, James Austin sold part of the property to his son, James Augustus Austin. The brick house may have been built by James Augustus. We're a little uncertain as to the Austin farmhouse, if it was built by James Sr. or his son James Augustus Austin. In 1876, the remaining property was willed to James Augustus Austin following his brother's death. Following his father's death. James Augustus did not hold on to the property long as his career followed a different path. In 1868, James Augustus Austin married Susan Graham, and the couple had 4 children: James Herbert, Annie Eleanor, Arthur Graham, and Carrie Elizabeth. James Augustus Austin sold the farm to James Ferris in 1879. According to the Canadian Biographical Dictionary and Portrait Gallery of Eminent and Self-Made Men in 1880, James Augustus Austin served as the clerk in the County Court of Peel. He was reared on the farm, attending a common school in his younger years, and subsequently spending 3 years at Victoria College in Coburg, intending at one time to study for the medical profession, but not completing his college course on account of failing health. He continued farming in the township of Toronto until 1867, when he was appointed clerk to the county court, deputy clerk of the Crown, and registrar of the surrogate court, at which time he removed to Brampton, the county town. He had a variety of clerkships. His variety of clerkships he is attending to with the utmost care, being always at his post. While on the farm, he acted part of the time as a director of the local agricultural society. Before taking county office, Mr. Austin interested himself a good deal in the successes of the Reform Party. Multiple owners followed the Austin family on their farm, and the house remained lived in until the early 1970s. And for a time, the farm was operated under the name Greenacres Farm. In 1979, the property was acquired for development purposes. The initial intention was to retain the old Austin house, again built around 1865 or 1866, but it was demolished in 1990. A few years later, one of the primary roads in the new subdivision developed on their farm was named for James Austin. Many members of the Austin family are buried nearby at the Britannia United Cemetery, and several of James Augustus Austin's children relocated to Western Canada. So again, James Austin Drive is named after the Austin family. We're just not sure if it's named after James Austin Sr. or his son James Augustus Austin Jr., or perhaps more likely both, because again, both are named James Austin. So with that, Rebecca, thank you very much for your inquiry. Always fun to kind of wander down and figure out why things have the names that they do. Our third question this week comes from Albert, Albert, I'm smiling as I answer your question here. This story first came to light many years ago for me. The late local historian Eric Gibson brought attention to the airship traveling from Montreal over Niagara Falls and eventually found its way crossing here in historic Mississauga, and a picture that surfaced many years later, and members of the Streetsville Historical Society were also involved in kind of exploring this story of the giant airship that flew over Mississauga. So what is it? This picture of an airship plainly labeled R-100 appearing over the hydro dam in Streetsville in the Credit River Valley, and it's labeled as 1930. And so it was, it was a little bit curious what this might be, and then the story that gradually comes to light highlights why on earth this giant airship found its way so close to the ground in the Credit River Valley in Streetsville in 1930. On August 11th, 1930, a giant airship called R-100 flew over historic Mississauga. Specifically, its route followed the Credit River Valley as it made its way from Niagara Falls back to Toronto. Strong headwinds had forced the ship to alter course, and it endeavored to stay low into the landscape, following the contours of the valley to make up time against prevailing winds. This route, bucking the winds, brought the airship low over the power dam on the Credit River in Streetsville. The R-100 story, however, started in Europe back in the 1920s. Great Britain felt that it was being left behind in the development of giant airships. Germany was far ahead of the rest of the world, with its Graf Zeppelin making a round-the-world flight in 1929. To correct this deficiency and to improve communications with the countries of the empire, Britain ordered two airships in 1924, both to be built to the same specifications. R-100, which was to have been built by private enterprise, was to fly to Canada to demonstrate the viability of the commercial airship service across the Atlantic Ocean. R-101, its sister ship, was to be built in a government facility under the supervision of the Air Ministry, and it was to fly to India. Both airships would be considerably faster than ocean liners. R-100 flew from Britain to Montreal, where it tied up a specifically built mooring mast at the St. Hubert airfield in the southern outskirts of Montreal. From there, the airship made a 24-hour round trip to Ottawa, Toronto, and Niagara Falls before returning to England. These events occurred in late July and early August of 1930. R-100 left its base at Cardington, about 45 miles north of London, England, at dawn on Tuesday, July 29th, 1930. The Atlantic crossing was uneventful, and before daybreak on Thursday, July 31st, the airship was well inside Newfoundland and followed the St. Lawrence River towards Montreal. Before reaching Quebec City, the airship ran into some severe turbulence, which caused a few rips and holes in the outer cover of the ship near the tail fins. Fortunately, it was possible to make some temporary repairs, and the ship was able to proceed on its way, though at a slightly reduced speed. At dawn on Friday, August 1st, 1930, R-100 moored at its mast at the St. Hubert Airport. The trip had taken 78 hours at an average speed of 42 miles an hour. This being about half the time taken from an ocean liner and train from London to Montreal, to give some promise of commercial viability. Montreal gave R-100 a wonderful welcome. More than 100,000 people visited St. Hubert every day for several consecutive days, and contemporary photographs show long lineups of people waiting to ascend the mooring mast and file through the public rooms of the huge airship. The ship was a great attraction to everyone along its route. There are photographs of R-100 over Montreal, over Toronto, and over Niagara Falls, amongst many other places in between. The return trip from Niagara Falls brought R-100 over Streetsville and the Credit River here in historic Mississauga. Local historian Verna May Weeks witnessed the passage of R-100, and in My Villages of Mississauga, she reminisced that it suddenly and silently glided into view, seeming to come right out of the corner of our house. It sailed straight ahead through the sky, resembling a long, slim, silvery gray loaf, appearing to have very smooth and very hard sides, and creating the impression in my mind that it could have easily been sliced, like a loaf of bread, into firm gray slices. Painted in large black letters on the lower part of the side was its name, R-100. The airship did not linger long in Montreal after its demonstration flight to Toronto and Niagara Falls. A few days after her return to Montreal, R-100 slipped the mooring at St. Hubert and made one last flight over the city, and then headed eastward for an uneventful return to Britain. R-100's sister ship did not fare well on its maiden voyage to India just a few months later. In early October, R-101 left Cardington in England, but hours later it crashed in France, killing most of those on board. This tragedy put an end to Britain's involvement in the giant airships, and within a very short period of time after the crash of R-101, R-100 was broken up for scrap. So, with that, thank you very much for spending your time with us here on Ask a Historian. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and stay up to date for new episodes. And please join us next time for another episode of Ask a Historian for more fascinating stories from Mississauga's history.